Mystra is the most important deity, and arguably the most important figure in the Forgotten Realms. This may not seem to make much sense on the face of it, but bear with me. Now, there will be very minor spoilers related to Baldur's Gate 3 in this video, specifically references to historical events that Gale himself mentions in conversation with you, as well as the beginning of his backstory, which most people are aware of by now. So practically, no spoilers. If you wish to know nothing about the history of the realms and its relationship to Baldur's Gate 3, or the very beginnings of Gale's story, then turn away now. Mystra is the goddess of magic in the Forgotten Realms D&D setting, and as such, presides over every form of magic tied to the Weave, from colorful displays of lights to powerful evocation spells such as Fireball and Ice Storm, to the dark arts of necromancy. If it is magic related to the Weave, something I will talk about in a bit, then it falls within her purview. And the Weave can be understood as the fabric of magic itself, from which magic is drawn. This fact alone has massive ramifications beyond what you might think. Your first thought might be, and not entirely incorrectly so, that Mystra is therefore the goddess of wizards and arcane spellcasters, and indeed, these are the groups most attracted to Mystra's worship, or at least those who overtly revere her. However, it must be understood that she governs all magic, which means that anyone at any time who chooses to employ magic, even clerics of other gods who gain their spells from other gods, have a form of divine permission from Mystra. The clearest example of this, and hence her absolute control over this, was during a conflict that took place well over a century prior to the events of Baldur's Gate 3, between a young incarnation of Mystra and her former mortal friend Cyric, both of whom had been promoted to godhood by the overgod Au, barely a decade before the end of the Time of Troubles. To combat Cyric's mad machinations, she withdrew his personal access to the Weave, and mind you, he was a greater deity, and then selectively allowed him to grant spells to his followers. Had she had wanted to, she could have cut him off from the Weave completely, including the ability to grant clerical magic to his faithful. And if she truly wanted to, she could withhold access to magic for every being, whether mortal or god. Now ultimately, this led to problems down the line with the Tribunal of Greater Deities, who made it clear that her actions lay outside the parameters of the permissible, and the laws that govern the gods. But it does demonstrate just how much power Mystra wields. Withholding access to the Weave also runs counter to the portfolio of Mystra and her desires, which is to promote magic and spellcraft above all else. Mystra is without question the most powerful of the gods, although she too is constrained by the rules of godhood as dictated by Au the Overgod. Now beyond this fact also means that Mystra is in large measure responsible for the maintenance of great portions of the fabric of reality itself. Perhaps not everything, but very important parts, as Faerun is infused with magic, and it is found nigh everywhere. This is in part the reason why Gale, your origin character or party member, feels such an overwhelming attraction to the goddess. It's not simply a matter of puppy love or being smitten by divine charm. No, it's far more than just that, because Gale, as a former archmage and chosen of Mystra, had a taste of a direct pipeline to creation itself. When Gale talks about the Weave, he is in fact talking about reality and much of its constituent parts. When you talk to him and get closer to him, you very much see this in operation. Being reduced in power and suffering from his malady is akin to him losing touch with reality, setting aside his power hunger and ambition, of course. Now, Mystra's station as the most powerful of gods means many things, and one of them is that in the history of the Forgotten Realms, she is in fact a powerful plot device that has moved and shaken nations, and to be perfectly frank, has begun and ended whole new editions of D&D at the behest of Wizards of the Coast. So who or what is Mystra? Mystra was originally known as Mistral, a different, more chaotic incarnation of the goddess of magic, and she was birthed, as legend has it, as a result of the conflict between the twin sisters of light and darkness, Selûne and Shar respectively. Legend tells us that Selûne was losing her battle against Shar, and tore out a piece of her essence, a mote of light, and hurled it at Shar, forcing Shar to lose parts of herself in the process. And out of this mixture of light and darkness, Mistral, a being of pure magic, emerged, and has governed magic in the Forgotten Realms in various capacities ever since. As mentioned prior, Mistral was of very chaotic bent, and wanted magic to flourish as freely as possible, with as few limitations as possible. and therefore, during her reign prior to the fall of Netheril, there were at least, theoretically, no upper limits to the potential use of magic, even and especially for mortals wielding magic, assuming the required competence, of course. And for the longest time, magic, one could say, was a free-for-all, permitted, of course, by the whims of the chaotic Mistral. I'll be making a separate video covering the full history of Netheril in due time, but the long and short of it is that a combination of fortuitous discoveries, elven aid, and above all, the very lax rules that Mistral had put in place had led to dizzying heights of magical success in Netheril, and it must be said, paved the way for Netheril's doom, and a radical shift of policy in the part of Mystra, a related but separate incarnation of the goddess. Netherese mages were called not wizards, but arcanists, and could wield magic on a scale never before seen or witnessed since. So much so, that one Netherese arcanist that will be known to you through your conversations with Gale actually casts a spell called Karsus Avatar, the only level 12 spell ever devised in the history of the Forgotten Realms, which allowed him to temporarily usurp the power of a god. Unfortunately for him and his miscalculations, he chose Mistral, something he immediately regretted, as his mind was filled with godlike power and the awesome responsibility and necessity of constantly maintaining the weave, which in many ways can be likened to a fabric of reality, and his mortal mind simply could not handle the task, and snapped. For an instant, which seemed like an eternity, in his failure, magic ceased to function, as Mistral was dead. And yet, after this instant, she was quickly reincarnated and took control of the weave again. This new incarnation was called Mystra, and was far more lawful and rigid than the previous Mistral ever was, and imposed numerous rules upon spellcasters. Magic users, for example, whether clerical or arcane, by dictate of the goddess, would henceforth have to rest to recover their spells, and would never again be able to cast spells above 9th level. There are a number of theories to explain the swift reincarnation of Mystra, albeit in a different form, but the most prominent one poses the idea that it was Au, the overgod's doing. Over time, Mistral had become absolutely necessary for the functionality and well-being of an intact Toril, and seeing this need, but also how Netherese arcanists ultimately destroyed the cosmic balance Au had established and sought to maintain, the new incarnation would be far more lawful and restrictive concerning magic, setting power limits on it in an effort to prevent further overreach on the part of mortals, all the while promoting it at the same time in a reasonable manner. It is thus no coincidence that Gale refers to Mystra as creation itself in some sense.
No sculpture or painting could ever do her justice. Only the fabric that she herself is and embodies. The weave. Mystra is all magic. As far as I'm concerned, she is all creation.
And this also indicates how Mystra, more so than any other deity, functions as a plot device for moving the story of the Forgotten Realms forward. In essence, our modern rules for D&D, born many decades ago, seen in this light, stem from a rearranging of how magic used to work to how it works now, because Mystra made it so. And for the longest time, the lawful Mystra remained just that, until the fairly recent Time of Troubles over a century ago, a tumultuous period of time that saw the death of many deities, including, most importantly, Mystra herself, as she sought access to her celestial realm, and was destroyed by the only god left with his full power, Helm, who was assigned to guard the gate. A new goddess emerged from this, a mortal called Midnight, who was permitted by Au to retain some of her mortal perspectives and sensibilities, and with that certain moral inclinations, being decidedly more good-natured than her predecessors. And this led, as already mentioned, to questionable decisions on her part during a divine conflict. But what was even more important than the time of troubles concerning Mystra was her later death, the result of a complot piloted and acted out by the joint efforts of Cyric, the then god of murder, lies, and madness, and Shar, the Lady of the Night, with whom you are all too familiar by now, I assume, and who had manipulated the younger and dumber Cyric into doing her dirty work in an effort to realize one of her grand ambitions, to gain control of the weave for herself. But even the goddess Shar could not have expected what would come next, as it led to the cataclysmic event known as the Spell Plague. Unlike in previous times, there was no instantaneous reincarnation of Mystra, which has led to much scholarly speculation, but needless to say, Mystra's death was catastrophic, and uncontrolled magic ripped through not just Faerun, but but the planes and the multiverse itself. Unbeknownst to Shar, with the collapse of the Weave, her own creation, the Shadow Weave, ceased to function, and there was chaos for decades, as magic became at times uncastable and unpredictable, and it even warped the gods themselves in the process. But this was, after a fashion, yet another Mystra-related plot device, which ushered in the less than successful 4th edition of D&D, and remained the status quo until 5th edition, aka the Second Sundering, when virtually all the lost, forgotten, and dead gods returned to Faerun by the grace of Au and Wizards of the Coast. Mystra herself returned after nearly a century of absence to reaffirm her duty to the Weave and the stability of magic. And so we see that Mystra is far more important than any other god in the Pantheon, both in terms of her importance to the maintenance of cosmic order and reality, as well as her utility as a plot device by Wizards of the Coast. And we can also now far better understand why Gale so easily fell in love with her, given his own precocious magical aptitude and love of magic. Many gods, such as Helm or Tyr, stand for abstract principles, but magic is, in a sense, as firm and solid a thing as one can imagine. Even if an individual himself does not wield it, he can still be touched by it in myriad ways, and thus Gale is not wrong in saying that Mystra is a goddess of creation, and one integral to the history of the realms and Dungeons & Dragons itself. Thanks for tuning in. Before I go, I'd like to invite you to my Discord server, where you can discuss Baldur's Gate 3 and Forgotten Realms lore with like-minded people. And if you like my content, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. And hit the bell icon to be informed of my videos. It'd be much appreciated. And I'll check you out next time. Take care.